Hello my loves. I feel like you guys know that I don't particularly like knowing much about books going into them. I quite like just having a vague idea of maybe some themes or generally a topic, but not really knowing too much about like specific plot or anything really beyond a vague semblance of a vibe. My general process is I will read the blurb of a book before I buy it, and then usually by the time I come to read it, I've forgotten entirely what that book is about, and I just go into it prepared to be surprised, hopefully pleasantly so. The book I want to talk about today is a very good example of that. We're talking about Innamorata by Ava Reid, because it's received some quite mixed reviews and I personally quite enjoyed it, and I just wanted to chat, to share my thoughts, but also to see what you guys think about this book if you have read it. I saw a video, I can't remember if the person had read an arc or if they'd read it close to the release, but it was around that sort of time, which I think was in March, so a good few months ago now. They basically said in that video that the book was gross. Not in a criticizing way, they were not being critical of this book. I think if I remember correctly, they enjoyed it. They were saying, as far as I can remember, that they feel like the marketing of the book did it a disservice by trying to push it as like a romance or romantasy rather than like advertising it as a gothic fantasy with romance in it. And they were talking about it there being a lot of like gory elements in it and recommending people check content warnings before reading it. And there was like a phrase that I've now seen multiple times of when people have talked about this book around like it being difficult to stomach or not reading it on an empty stomach. I can't remember 100% what this person said, because as always I did not interact with this video at all. I just scroll. I don't like it.
I don't like it.
So I can't go back and find it, but they used a phrase similar to that, and that was all the convincing I needed. If there's one thing you need to know about me, which if you don't already, is that I like a weird little book. I like a weird kind of gross little book, and I've realized while delving into more horror over the past however many months, I quite like body horror specifically.
I definitely don't think I'm well.
Body horror, natural horror, anything related to any kind of fungi, insects, that's my kind of horror. I'm also not particularly squeamish, which obviously I think helps, so I can quite easily usually stomach those kinds of things. They don't really bother me, unless it's anything related to wrists. I really don't like wrists. I don't know what it is about them. I've never liked them. I think it's because like they're very thin, they're very delicate. The veins are so close to the skin and it looks like I could just like, you know?
No.
I don't like it. I'm not squeamish, just keep your wrists away from me. The point of me saying all that is that I went into this book all cocky, like, I'm gonna be fine, I'll be able to handle this, it's not gonna be that gross. And you know what? I was, so let's talk about it. So to give you a premise of this book, in case you've missed it, you don't know what it's about, this is a fantasy. We're on an island, so there's different noble houses, all of which are named after different body parts. And particularly we're focusing on the House of Teeth, who our main character is a part of. Our main character is Agnes, who is one of the last two like descendants of the House of Teeth, and also her cousin, whose name is not Malgazata, but for some reason when I was reading this book, my brain kept changing her name to Malgazata, so I can't remember what her name actually is, and for the rest of this video we will just be referring to her as Malgazata. Malgazata is the heir, she's the older cousin, and in this world, a long time ago, but not long enough ago that it's not still very relevant, there was a plague. All of the noble houses were trying to figure out ways to like save people's lives, and in doing that they accidentally found out a way to bring people back from the dead, and this magic created these monsters. I can't remember if they were called revenants, but kind of like that kind of vibe. The royal family from the mainland, as these monsters started crossing over to the mainland, they were like, nah, we've had enough of this, and they decided they were just going to take control of this island. Agnes has been brought up by her grandmother, who's awful, to try and bring back necromancy, and in order to do this, Agnes has to make sure her cousin Malgazata marries the prince. That is where we're starting. That is the vibe for this, okay? On Goodreads and Storygraph, it's sitting like somewhere around a 3.5, which I actually think is pretty good. I think it's maybe just the fact that the 1 and 2 star reviews or the discussions I've seen online, the people who don't like this book have quite a passion about why they didn't like it that makes it feel like it's maybe a lot more mixed than it is. So like on one side, you have people who quite liked the book, said it was atmospheric, well written, can't wait to read the next one. And then on the other side, the people who didn't like it, criticisms range from it's poorly written, the writing was annoying, it was written for shock value, and like some people taking like a real stand as if like this book was against their morals. There are some themes in this book probably are against most people's morals. And so if you don't like that and you don't want to read things against that, that's fine, you do you. And I just want to make it clear, I'm not saying that this book is in line with my morals. There are scenes in this book that are firmly against what I would deem acceptable or right or ethical in the real world. But I can enjoy and acknowledge the purpose of things in a book that I personally find not okay. Taking a less serious example of like the Fae Guardian series, all of the like male love interests in that book are incredibly, they're maybe all a little bit obsessive, they're all a little bit possessive, they're very, very protective. I fucking love that series. I love those books. I love every character in those books except for maybe a few. Yet if a man came up to me in real life and started saying shit like they do, that man is getting a punch in the face. I can enjoy it in fiction, that doesn't mean it's okay in real life. And I feel like although the subject matter in this book is very, very different and a lot darker, I'm looking at it in the same way. But the 1 and 2 star reviews of this book were like very, I don't want to say vicious, that's not the word I mean, just like they were very passionate about their dislike of this book, and like some of them saying like just that Ava Reid had crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed. And like, look, here's the thing, I really liked this book. I so nearly rated it 5 stars. I only didn't because I kind of didn't like the ending very much. I think I rated it 4.5 in the end. I mean, honestly, the ending just kind of annoyed me. I'm not gonna spoil it and tell you what happens, but it just felt cheap. I didn't like it. I'll still read the next one because I liked the rest of the book enough. Wasn't a fan of the ending. In general though, I thought it was a good book. Is it gross? Hell yeah it is. I will give you an example. This is definitely not the worst, and this is definitely not one of the things that people were having the most like problems with. But just to give you an idea of like the general level of grossness in this book, this isn't a spoiler either because this literally happens in the first chapter, but if you'd rather not know anything that happens in this book, feel free to skip. As I said, I'm not particularly squeamish, so I don't feel like this is that bad, but if you are particularly squeamish, maybe watch with caution. There's some descriptions of body dismemberment, I suppose. So literally the first chapter is a funeral for Agnes and Malgazarta's grandmother. She's just died, the mistress of the House of Teeth, leaving the position to Malgazarta. Now, because of the plague that I mentioned before and the necromancy that came from it, there are specific ways that bodies must be disposed of in this world to prevent people trying to bring them back from the dead. So each noble house has what's called leeches, and they're basically kind of like doctors, but their role in the funerals is to take parts of the deceased's body so that it can't be reanimated. So, you know, House of Teeth, for example, they take all the teeth. There's the House of Blood, the House of Bones, the House of Lungs. I can't remember what the other houses are. They just take all of those parts of the body, and then once all of that's gone, the last bit of the funeral is for them to stamp the remains of the body into the dirt, which is it is gross, and it is described on page, but again, I'm not very squeamish, so I didn't find that particularly uncomfortable to read at any point. I appreciate some people might. That, however, is not the thing that most people were bothered by, but I feel like that's just like and I did give you a baseline of the level of grossness we're starting with. I did think a bit about how to approach discussing this because I don't want to fall into that trap of like saying how gross it is in a way of like then basically what I did of people being like, I bet it's not that gross, and just reading it, because I did see one video that was pretty much doing that, and I really didn't like the way this person approached this video. Again, didn't interact with it, so can't show you it or tell you who it was. They were basically saying like, this is the grossest book of the year, you're not gonna be able to read this on an empty empty stomach, especially seeing some other people's thoughts on this book and like their reviews of it. I just personally feel like that's in bad taste to do.
Hi, I be editing, and I don't think that I explained this video very well that I was talking about, because it just sounds like every other video I'd mentioned up until that point. I feel like this one in particular, if I remember correctly, had said something like, if you've not been triggered by a book so far this year, then you're definitely going to be triggered by this one. It was like, maybe like, if you're not easily triggered, there is something in this book that's going to trigger you. It was something like that just very much did seem like trying to bait people into reading it so that they could like prove themselves or something, which again, I know is exactly what I did, but I just feel like it's a very irresponsible way to talk about a book or try and get someone to read a book, given that this book, based on reviews and other things I've seen, it definitely does include things that people got genuinely upset by and genuinely distressed by. I just think that's quite a gross way to make content and to try and incentivize someone to read a book.
So all I would say is, if you haven't read this book and you want to read it and you know that you potentially can be upset by certain things, or even if you just personally are the kind of person who reads, who likes to know a list of potential content warnings beforehand, I will leave the link to the STORYGRAPH listing of this book in the description, because STORYGRAPH is very good at having relatively comprehensive lists of content warnings where the warnings come from people who have read the book themselves. So they will sort of write what they feel was in there, and then you can see how many other people also said that. So you get a good idea of what's in there, and I feel like you get a more comprehensive list than you might get elsewhere. Because like, going back to like baiting people into trying to read the book, it's not that I'm saying like I wouldn't recommend this book to people. I would, but I would only recommend it to people that I know have specific tastes and know what kind of like horror or whatever like dark fantasy they like. And I absolutely have no problem with people not wanting to read things that contain themes they personally dislike or find upsetting. In fact, I think that's good. If you get to a part in a book and it's causing you distress, stop reading it, take a break, look after yourself, and only go back to it if you feel like you could absolutely handle it. The issue I had when I was reading some of the reviews, alongside the like what I feel was almost like engagement baiting of some videos, was also some people like feeling like it just is wrong to write about certain things, or that the author themselves must be an awful person to have written about things. The two things that people seem to have the most discomfort with was mentions of cannibalism and necrophilia. And like, look, I understand, okay? They're uncomfortable things to be reading about, but in my opinion, that's the point. Especially the people saying like, this was just gross, this was disgusting for the sake of it, this was just for shock value. I kind of disagree. The cannibalism, I will say, it's not shown on page. It's just mentioned. The necrophilia is shown on page and it is a very uncomfortable scene to read. In my opinion, both of them served a purpose in the book. Both of them were there to show brutality of certain people or people's or characters' like histories and further development. It made sense to me while they were there. Like, could you say they didn't need to be there? Yeah, of course. I also wouldn't go as far as to say they were just there for shock value, because they made sense in the context of everything else. But again, I feel like that's the fault of the marketing for saying it's a romance. Yes, there's romance in it. It's a significant theme, but I wouldn't describe it as a romance. I certainly wouldn't describe it as romantasy or dark academia as it's described on Goodreads. This is fantasy with a significant romantic plot in it, but it's not romantasy. You know what you expect when you're reading romantasy. This is not that. So here's where I think the actual problem is with this book, and what could have avoided all of this. I mean, firstly, it's the marketing. That's the big thing. But secondly, there are absolutely no content warnings in this book. I'm saying this as someone who never reads content warnings, because thankfully, I don't really get upset by things anymore. I definitely used to. There were certain things that I could not read about or watch in films, but I'm at a stage in my life now, after doing much healing, that I can read about them and be absolutely fine. So I don't need to read content warnings anymore. However, that's not the case for everybody, and there was one specific video that I saw of someone talking about a scene in the book that really upset them and they felt like it was very out of the blue. It was a scene of a traumatic birth. Of course, that's going to affect someone, or it could affect someone who's been through it. That's not even one of the main things that was being talked about being upsetting in this book. It's why I'm not like going into here's all of the upsetting things in this book, because I appreciate there's a lot of things I would have missed because they don't personally upset me, or I'm fine with them now. And it's why I would recommend people read content warning if you know you are upset by certain things, because no book is worth traumatizing yourself over. No book is worth getting really upset over and like having to then like heal and recover from that thing being brought back up again. I know some people are gonna be like, we don't need content warnings, people are too sensitive. Shut up. It costs nothing. There is no disadvantage to the publisher or the author for including them, and if people don't want to read them or don't need to read them, they can just skip them. On one hand, you could say, it's a dark fantasy, you've got to expect that there's gonna be uncomfortable things in it, but you can't possibly know everything that's gonna be in it, and you can't possibly know what's gonna upset you or not. So I think that's the issue. Just put a list. Like, it's not hard. I feel like there would have been a lot less of this quite passionate dislike or criticism of the book if that had been the case, accompanied by the fact that it had been marketed and tagged properly, not as a romance. Those are my thoughts. I would love to know what your thoughts are, especially if you read the book and what you felt about it. I'm gonna go and open every single window in my flat and potentially have the coldest shower known to man because I'm so hot and probably smelled so bad. And that's probably a good place to leave it, right? Yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.